My name is Sonsil Kalimo, and I would be doing the presentation for today's session on purchase order processing. So some of you all would basically use POs today for inventory or non-inventory items, but you may not also be aware of the different types of purchase orders. So there are different types of purchase orders, which basically for inventory or non-inventory items. So you have your dropship purchase order, and that actually can be directly shipped to a customer site or a customer location. Then you have your blanket purchase orders, and that is where you have a contract to have a certain amount or a certain quantity delivered to a customer over a period of time. And you may get some sort of a discount if you do enter in terms of a long-term contract with that vendor. Then we also have the blanket PO. And then you have a hybrid, which is called a dropship blanket, which is a hybrid, which is made in terms of a blanket form. So with that being said, we can go to the purchasing screen. Now, the latest version of GP would be GP 18.4, right? So if it is you're not on the latest upgrade, you can always upgrade to the latest version. They have a couple of new features there. All right, so on the purchasing screen, for those who have not used it before, you would go to purchasing and then you go to purchase order entry. On the purchase order entry screen, there is a drop-down list. And as I explained, you have 4 types of purchase orders. And with sales orders, and if you're familiar with sales order processing, you would have to pick the same types of sales order, just like you would do with regards to the purchase order. All right, so you would pick the type of PO, or you would set a default, select the default type of purchase order that you're going to use as well. The most familiar type of purchase order that is used across the board would be the standard purchase order, right? Some do use blankets, a few do use dropship, but you would find that standard is mostly used. And also one thing to note is that we are not going to go through all the options, but we are going to show with regards to the standard purchase order how that operates. Okay, so we are going to just walk through the various fields that are on the screen. When I hit tab, you're going to see a purchase order that is generated. Now, for reporting purposes, you can also create a buyer. And with the buyer ID, you can use the lookup glass and you can select a buyer that you would have added within the system. I'm currently using my Fabricam company. So these are my demo buyers, right? So like I said, this is mainly used for reporting purposes. And you can also assign a particular buyer to a particular group of products, and then they can be in charge or responsible for always purchasing those products. So it's just like another sort of reporting aspect, right? And so when you say you want to leave the date field as today, that's normal and that's fine, but you can also modify the date field with the arrow that's located right next to it. And here you would see a purchase date entry window comes up. Now, the only reason that you will actually do that sort of modification, because that would actually default to the required date for all the different line items that you put in. So for instance, if I was to purchase something that was supposed to be delivered at the end of the following month, for instance, then I can actually put the promise date, right, as a date that would be subsequently following as well, right? And then it would be assigned those dates. Now with the promise ship date, this is going to be when the vendor is going to ship the goods to us. So why do we have these many dates? Well, one, the required date is your internal required date. That is when you require or your company requires the goods or the services that you are purchasing. The promise date is when the vendor states that they can ship the goods or services that you require. And then the promised ship date is now going to identify, and that's going to tell you in a practical sense, if you look at it at a GP perspective, these are all stored in the database. So it is going to be stored as or can be pulled rather as a smart list report. So you may want to remind yourself as when you confirm a shipment with a vendor, when vendors state that something would arrive as the promised date and the date based on when they actually ship those goods to you, right? So it's not a bad idea if you don't currently fill these out, but it's also great for reporting purposes, right? So for those out there who use inventory with purchasing, it's not a bad idea to keep track of these dates, right? Now I'm going to enter a vendor, right? So this is the lookup for my vendor ID. And the currency would also be defaulted. And as with any module in GP, you have multi-currency capabilities as well. All right. So some of you may not have the ability to use project accounting. Some companies use project accounting. A few clients do use project accounting with purchase order entry, right? And you are able to also enable project accounting if you are using it for purchase order, right? And once you do enable it, it will contain a link for you to use project accounting. Right, so it's pretty much the same when you're using project accounting. It's pretty much the same as the functionality in which purchase order processing works. The only difference is that if you're buying something to a project code, it is not going to go into inventory, right? What happens, it will just get expensed to the project, right? However, we are going to just buy inventory and we're going to just use the item because we're not using project accounting for this webinar, but we're going to buy some inventory into stock. So you can use your lookup glass. And here you can have the list of items that you would like to purchase. So I am going to select processor. And here you can see that this item hasn't been assigned to the vendor item. Do I want to assign the vendor item number? And here I click yes. All right. And I'm going to click save. Now, another thing that the system can do is also buy in various units of measures as well. So I could either buy each or a case. In this instance, I'm going to select a case. And I am actually going to buy 2 cases of them. And that is set up in the item master in terms of the translation of the item units of measure. Okay. So in the item master itself, you would maintain the purchasing screen where the case would be equal to 10 units, right? Based on the number of cases that I'm buying. So you can either change the unit cost if you wish as well. I'm going to leave mine as 160,000. And then you can select the site ID. And I am going to receive that into my warehouse. Now, if you got multiple locations, you can select them. And if you have a system where your inventory module has been turned on, the site ID would be a required field. If you're not using inventory in your environment, however, then this site ID would not be a required field. So just bear that in mind, because I know some persons may not be using the inventory module and some may be using the inventory module for the purchasing. Okay. So a couple things. You have your Dynamics GP items. This is under a double line. If I shrink this, all right, you're going to see one line. All the information is kind of retracted, right? Just a caution, if you are entering your items and it is under, you are entering it under a single line mode, so to speak, right? You are going to remember that if it is you are using inventory and you don't enter the site ID and it's not defaulted, it is going to be issuing you an error message, so just letting you know that the site ID is not filled in, even though when you look in at the forefront of the screen, it seems as though you would have filled out all the applicable lines. Yeah, so just keep that in mind. So a little tip to just always make sure that the double line entry is available for you to see. Right? If you want to see the details of the item, you can click on this arrow. This will lead you to the item detail entry screen. And that brings up a whole number of fields at your disposal. So in this particular example here, the inventory account is actually, this came from the item master itself. And for those of you that's familiar with the item screen, there is an accounting area where you can define your inventory account for. And if you're using manufacturing or you're using work in process, then that inventory account can be mapped to the work in progress account. All right, so just bear that in mind. Now, if you're issuing it to a project, then this will also be overwritten by a project accounting GL account. right? And I believe it also goes to the work in progress and material account as well. So the inventory account can change, and it depends on your system setup that you have in GP, right? So usually based on what you're using, we have to, fine tune the settings to ensure that the system does what you require it to do. All right. Now, because we filled in our header of the purchase order with the required date, right? We have the required date here populated, and you are able to still change it on the screen, right? But here's our required date, and here we have the other additional date fields as well. So if it is we call the vendor and they are running late, we can change the current promise date to May 17th. And here you can see that we still have a reference of the original promise date from the vendor, right? Which is a field that cannot be changed, right? So you still have that reference point, right? So just remember, you can fill this in because if it is you wanted to track, say, vendor performance or from a reporting standpoint, you can use these fields for reporting purposes. All right. Now there is something here called landed cost group, right? There are not many persons that use the landed cost group, but it can add to your product cost based on accessing other charges such as customs, duties, taxes, etc. All right. And the big difference between the landed cost and using landed cost and not using landed cost is that the landed cost gets included in the cost of the product, right? And it will therefore go into your inventory. Whereas just accessing a tax or a freight on a PO, that does not actually go into the inventory cost of that item itself. All right, that's a separate charge. All right, so that is pretty much this item detail window, so to speak. So we can exit out of the screen. The screen is fairly straightforward and fairly simple to also set up. So once you're comfortable with what you have entered within this window, you can have this saved. All right. And on the screen, we'll notice a couple of things. We currently have a PO status to the bottom here. It's currently also set to new. So anytime you create a purchase order, the initial status that you would be given within the system would be new, right? If I decided to print this purchase order, right? So if I was to save, so this PO 2075. Right? And if I were to print this purchase order, right? I could use the blank paper format, and then I can say print, and then I can print this to screen. Okay. So here I do have my purchase order, and maybe I should, let me reprint this. A second. But as you saw that when I printed the purchase order, the status is not released. But let me reprint the PO once more. And instead of using templates, I would use the standard report that comes from GP. All right, so you can either print the purchase order as a Word template, which was done previously, or you can use the standard GP reporting format. All right, purchase orders can also be customized to include the company logos or additional fields that the company may require. All right. So as I mentioned, the PO status is now released. And the reason that this is great because of the status change is that you can now use the PO status in various reports to see what needs to be printed, what needs to be sent to vendors, or what has not been printed or has not been sent to any one as yet. Right, so it is also a good sort of workflow that GP has so that you can see what's status is it. When you currently do go through more of the PO processes, the status will continue to change from partially received or received, right, to ship to close. All right. So this is not a bad way to kind of like track the PO status. Now, if it is you wanted to add the freight or the miscellaneous or the tax and so on, that can also be added to your purchase order. Now, the tax code is going to be dependent on if you're using inventory items, right, or not using inventory items as well. Right, so it comes from different places. It doesn't come from one place. It depends on, like I said, either or. So if you are using an inventory item, if you're not using inventory items, sorry, the tax is determined from your company setup. And if it is an inventory item, then the tax would come from your warehouse site where you are receiving the inventory to. All right. And you can also, depending on your tax methodology, it could also be tax based on the vendor location. It could be tax based on your location, right? So depending if it's US tax, Canadian tax, so it all depends. The tax rules will vary. All right. So I am going to save this. I also want to show, and we could probably just run through a simple example with regards to the dropship, right? If you tab, yes, again, you are going to get a automatic vendor number, PO number again. And basically, if it is I was to choose a vendor, say for example, Ace Travels, right? So I'm doing a same purchase from this vendor that I did previously for a standard. The moment that I click tab, you see the enter dropship customer window populates. So this customer ID is displayed because when I process a purchase order, what you are going to see is that you cannot do a goods receipt for a dropship. So you can only pay an invoice using Dropship. So what is going to happen is that the inventory does not actually come into the warehouse. So I will pick a customer and I would say Aaron Fitz, for example. right? And you can pick also the various ship to address, right? If you have more than one listed here, right? And then once I select OK for that particular customer, and if I use the same item number, say processor, all right, and unit of measure, I'm going to buy each. In this case, this time I'm just going to probably buy 5 eaches of it. And I'm also going to put warehouse, even though I'm not going to receive into the site, right? It's still going to require me to enter site ID. All right, and let me save. So this is PO272076. All right. Now, in the actions, I do not have a choice to actually do a good receipts for dropship, right? Because fundamentally, what is going to happen is that those goods are not going to be received into my inventory. Those goods are actually going to be shipped directly to the vendor, to your customer, or to the customer record that you have selected when you were creating the purchase order, right? So what needs to happen for a dropship is that the customer would need to notify you by some sort of mechanism that you may have, or some agreement that you would have had with the customer, that the goods were actually received by them, and then what you would do is then process that invoice when the vendor sends you that invoice document. All right. So that is dropship. And we can probably, just for the purposes, let me also probably go through a blanket as well. That may be beneficial to you also. So with regards to the blanket, we're going to do the same thing. All right. I just wanted to share with you kind of like how all of these work. I know a lot of people use standard, but just in case that there are persons out there that do also use dropship or use blanket POs as well. All right. So we are going to pick that same vendor. My vendor is Travels. All right. And for my items, there was also something that you should also notice. Okay, so let me delete this and let's do this again. So I'm going to tab. So watch when I tab through the fields. Then I select my vendor. You'll notice that it tabs directly to the item field. Now, if it is you had the project accounting, it would have skipped over the project accounting fields because you cannot have a blanket purchase order for project accounting. All right. Now I'm going to select my item, which is processor. And the way that in which a blanket PO works is that the first line on the PO is actually the total blanket PO amount. All right. So this example that I'm going to do, I am going to actually purchase, let's say 600 of these processors from this particular vendor, Age Travel, and then I'm going to buy it over a period of time. So I'm going to select eaches again, and this time I'm going to order 600 of them. And I'm also going to choose my site ID, which is warehouse. All right. So the thing about a blanket PO is that you can only put one item on the PO. All right. So you'll see in a second here what I mean by that. But you can't buy multiple items on the same blanket purchase order. And the reason for that is because the next step of this blanket process is going to be when I click blanket, right? What is going to happen is that you can either purchase by quantity or by value. But let's say I am going to order 150 of these as an example. And the first date is going to be, say, you may want them by the required date. Let's say June 1st. Right? And then we tab. And then we say we're going to order another 150 of these. And these I want at the end of June. June 30th. But what we are not going to do is place an order for them as yet. Well, for this one. So we're going to uncheck the release. All right, so that's what this flag means. So it means that, yes, I'm entering into this contract with the vendor, but I'm only going to release the various lines to them over a period of time, right? So let's just finish up here. Let's do 150. And let's say this one would be the 3rd of July. And my final amount. And you can see that there's a running tab up here. So it's saying that the remaining quantity to enter is 150, right? The extended quantity was 600. So we're going to enter our final line. And let's say this one will be at the end of July. Okay. And now you can see that my remaining quantity now to enter is 0, right? And my control line is still 600. So when I click OK, right, what actually shows is a bunch of different lines, right? And these lines would be based on different required dates that we have entered for this purchase order. So let's save and let's go back. Right, so here you can see now the status is new. And if I go to print, right, you have a couple of options now where before we did not have these additional radio buttons. We had the purchase order, but now because we're doing a blanket purchase order, you have available options available to you. So you can print the PO, and this is going to print now the lines that have been released, So we can show that real quick. So under purchase order, we're printing a blank purchase order when we would use the standard GP report. Okay. So here you can see is that here's my purchase order. Here's my 150 that has been released to be purchased, and this is my total amount, right? Now, if I was actually going to print, and let me bring back up. So let's go print again. So if I was going to print the delivery schedule, and let's go print. Then what you would see is a list of the overall shipments that was contracted with the vendor, and you have all the different delivery dates. Okay. Now, if we go back into the blanket purchase order, and we go to blanket, and you want to release that second line, and then we click OK. So let's say we're going to release our delivery for the 2 delivery dates. And then I'm going to print, I'm going to save, and I'm going to print the purchase order. Let's do blank. Oops. And let's print that purchase order. So now you got the 2 lines, right? So it shows the title of, and this is also important to note, so it now changes the title of the purchase order now to change order, right? So what this is saying is that the PO is now changed because I have now released another line for another required date, right? So you would receive for June 1st, and then you would receive for June 30th, and then as you release, you would receive subsequently for the other required dates. So this is just a way to just show how to perform if you are a company that sets up blanket POs. So this is how it is done within GP. All right. So and this is a good way just to not having to re-enter purchase orders over time if it's something continuously that's being sent to a customer on a month-by-month basis. Blanket purchase orders are one of the functionality within GP that can be set up. All right, and this can be used for whether it's inventory or non-inventory items. All right. So that's really from a purchasing standpoint. So let's just go back. All right, so really 3 basic types. These are just the 3 basic types that our clients may use: standard, the dropship, or the blanket. And these functionalities will allow you to assign a PO line. All right, but if, for example, you have a sales order that is back ordered, you can allow sales document commitments on the PO, and you can assign that purchase order line to a purchase order. The purpose behind that is basically if it is you do a goods receipt, it actually does not go into inventory. What happens is that it gets allocated to that sales order. So you may have clients who do purchases, and it may be purchases of products that maybe that they resell. Then if they bring it into the warehouse, they resell it. So, and if it is you're not keeping stock of those particular items that you are reselling, then you can allow these sales document commitments within that purchase order. Right? And that way, when you do the goods receipt, you don't have to worry about reallocating to that sales order. It's kind of like skipping that process there. All right. And most people who use the sales commitments functionality don't actually bring it into the warehouse. They may have like say a staging area that they may bring it into, and then they would resell it like that. But this is completely up to you how you would like to use the functionality, but the functionality is available to be used. All right. Another thing to note with regards to purchase order functionality is that you can email PO as well directly from Dynamics GP. Once you have the functionality set up in GP, you do have that availability to also email from the purchase order entry screen. So that's fairly straightforward on the purchase order side. On the receiving side, oh, one thing that we can also cover is the purchase order generator. So purchase order generator is also another handy tool that can be used. So you want to keep a certain level of stock in-house, and when it gets below that level, you want to buy it, right? So imagine you're in your warehouse and you're looking at your stock and you notice that it's below a certain point, right? And you are able to place an order for it. So that's basically what the suggested purchase order would do. It will allow you to generate a purchase order for stock once it's under a certain reorder limit. All right. I just wanted to make note of that point as well. Okay. All right. So now we want to go with the receiving entry. Sorry, my screen was freezing up a little bit there. So now we have the receiving transaction entry screen. Right, so you want to log in, you want to receive a shipment. Two things that you need to know is that there are three types of goods receipt that can be done, right? You have a shipment. So this means that you are just receiving the product, right? And it's either going to be expense to the project or it's going to be expense to your general ledger, right? Or it will go into inventory depending on if you use the inventory module. Then we have the shipment and invoice. Now, if it's an expense item and you get the invoice at the same time that you receive the shipment, so what would happen is that you can process the shipment invoice, right? So that's the second option. And the last one is used for in-transit inventory. We're not going to cover that, but if it is you do a two-step inventory transfer from one warehouse to another, you can then also do a goods receipt for that in-transit inventory. So there's the shipping out from one of the warehouses, right? And then there's the good receipt in the other warehouse, all right? So one thing to note in terms of difference between the shipment and the shipment invoice is that with the shipments we're booked to the goods receipt, invoice receipt, suspense account, right? GRIR, yes, goods receipt. And then the shipment invoice, if it is you do a goods receipt and there is no suspense account, it will go directly to payables and it will skip over the suspense account and go directly to payables. So if you do the shipment now and the invoice later, the invoice would then clear out that suspense account. So you can simply run a financial report to see what was received, but not invoiced, right? So there are smartest reports that can be pulled to see what has been shipped and not yet received, etc. So with these shipments, you select the shipment type, you do tab again, and it would automatically generate the receipt number. Then you pick your vendor. And if you automatically choose auto receive, you will get a list of all the purchase orders that are outstanding for the particular vendor chosen. So you can receive for multiple purchase orders. Right? And you can click receive. Right here, you can generate some serial numbers. Okay, so here you can do a goods receipt for multiple purchase orders on here. So I'm going to delete. And we're going to do it again. So another thing I want to show, if you come in here, and let's go tab, and let's go to order receive. Here you're going to see, it's going to show all the list of purchase orders that's out there in the system and which one would you like to receive against. So there's two ways that you can do it, right? You may not understand or have that understanding of probably the vendor that's associated with the particular purchase order, but you may have the PO number that you would like to receive against, right? So it may be easier to go to order receive and look for that purchase order that you would like to receive against. All right. So if I click on of this PO to PO 2075, and I could select, if I go to view details, now this screen comes up, and now you can say, okay, you want to receive 2, or you would probably want to receive 1 out of the 2, right? So it's up to you. And then you can click receive. Right, so that's another way of receiving. Now, if it is you go to the distributions window, here you can see the purchasing accounts, right? And those are the GL mappings that takes place in the backend. Right? If, like I said, if you use landed costs, these will be filled in with different percentages, different dollar amounts. All right. If you do use project accounting, it is going to be expense a work in progress account. All right. You can drill down into the details of the item. Right. So you do have that flexibility to also see what details of the item that you're receiving. Right. If it's a lot managed, it's going to prompt you for a lot number, etc. So this is the details of the item that's going to be received. You are able to also attaching documents to this window as well. Doesn't prevent you from doing that. And then if it is you post it, it's going to get booked into the inventory. And that is pretty much all that is to it. All right, so the next step, so you could print the posting journals to screen as well. Distribution detail. And you could just cancel the ones that you don't want to print to screen. All right, so this is your posting journal. And this is the distributions detail report. All right, another one that we're going to look at is the enter match invoices. So we would have done the shipment. We're going to select the vendor. All right, we're going to click on auto invoice. All right, so it works the same way as if it is you were doing a receipt, right? But now we're doing a auto invoice for the items as well. So you can select any one of your items here. So let's select the PO 275 and let's select invoice. And I could enter a vendor document number. And then you can check the distribution. So this is my purchasing account and then my payables account. All right. So order invoice, order receipt, right? It really works very similarly, as you can see, right? As you're matching that invoice right? Now, if there was a receipt for that purchase order, then it matches the receipt to the purchase order in question. All right. Now, you can actually go to match the shipments via this, the arrow. And here you can see the little check mark here that has match. Now, if there's variances in cost, you can see that it would map that purchase price variance account here, right? And if there was a variance, you would have seen that variance cost under the unit variance, which is located here, right? So we don't have any variance in cost for this receipt. All right. Okay, so the next and final step, you can just click on post. So that is the process. I'm going to cancel these reports. Okay, so basically that is the purchasing order process. What we have reviewed today would have been under the purchase order entry, the 3 or 4 types of purchase orders that can be used. The only real difference between the dropship and the others is that the dropship, you do not do a goods receipt. You only invoice for it. And that's because the inventory is not coming to your warehouse. Yeah, so there's just no need to process that goods receipt, right? For the blanket PO, for the standard PO, the goods receipt process is exactly the same. Basically on the blanket PO, you're just looking at that one line that has been released, and on a standard PO, you release basically whatever line items that you have added to that purchase order. All right. And that is the process. So I hope that, I know it was kind of long, but it's also good to know the different ins and outs of what the purchase order processing process can achieve. So I hope that with sitting in this webinar today, you are able to take with you something that can be applied to your organization. And I hope that you all also have learned something today as well.